Hey guys, today is the first of 3 lessons where we're going to be talking about how to make disciples using the resources at PursueGOD.org. So whether you've come to this topic because you're going through the pursuit with somebody in your life, our 12-week discipleship track, or whether you're coming to this topic as the standalone Disciple Maker training series, either way, we're going to give you really practical guidance on how to be a disciple maker in your everyday life. And I want to start with this training image here. We're going to talk about the picture, and we're going to talk a little bit later in this series about the process. The picture answers the question, what is a disciple? And a disciple is someone who does these 3 things. They trust Jesus for salvation, they honor God in their everyday life and lifestyle and choices, and lastly, they make disciples. And we're going to be talking about the third leg of this circle here, how to make disciples. In fact, in the next lesson, we're going to get into the process. But for right now, we need to start with this question. Why should I make disciples in the first place? Some of you may be out there thinking, I don't think I'm someone who can do this. Well, I hope as you look at these 3 reasons for making disciples, you'll change your mind. And here's the first reason. We call it the commission. We make disciples simply because Jesus said so. The Great Commission can be found in Matthew chapter 28, verses 18 through 20. Jesus came and he told his disciples, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples. You know, this kind of reminds me of my dad when I was growing up. If he told us to do something, we would have to do it. If we tried to argue with him, he would say, no, I'm the dad, you're the kid, I have authority, you don't, you need to be obedient. And I think that's really what Jesus is getting at right here. He says, I'm the one with all of the authority, so I want you guys to go and make disciples. This was the last thing Jesus told his disciples before he left the earth. And look at what he says in verse 20, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. I think he said that because he probably saw the fear and anxiety on his disciples' faces when he was giving them this commission. And you might feel the same way, but don't worry, God's going to go with you. You can do this. Now, here's the second reason to make disciples, and this is the strategic reason. Jesus envisioned a church where pastors equip and people do the ministry. This is what Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 4. He says, these are the gifts that Christ gave to the church, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, and the pastors and teachers. And look at what it says next. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and build up the church, the body of Christ. So look at this passage. Who is doing the majority of the work? It is the regular Christian, not the paid staff member at your church. Now, at my church, at first, we just told the people to invite their friends and that we would do all the work as we preach sermons to them from week to week. But we realized over time, and this passage was a big part of it, we realized that this was not God's strategy, that we were supposed to, as pastors, we were supposed to be equipping the people to go out and make disciples. And here's why. It's our third and final reason for making disciples, and it's just simply because of the need. We make disciples because people need help on a personal level. They don't just need to hear a good sermon once a week. They need personal one-on-one help. Jesus understood that in Matthew chapter 9 when he saw and he looked at the crowds after preaching a great sermon. It says that he had compassion on them because they were confused and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Think about this verse for just a second. That Jesus, who's preaching the best sermon anyone's ever heard, I'm sure, his sermon was phenomenal. Thousands of people had gathered to hear his sermon, but it was not enough. Even after a great sermon preaching to a large crowd, and doesn't that sound like some of our churches? Even after all of that, Jesus had compassion on them because they were still confused and they were still helpless even after his sermon. And so look at his response. Look at his solution. So he said to his disciples, the harvest is great, but the workers are few. And here's the answer. So pray to the Lord who is in charge of the harvest and ask him to send more workers into the field. And this is why you should become a disciple maker. It was Jesus' plan all along. Sermons are great, but sermons are not enough. People are confused and helpless, and they need help, and you can be a part of the solution. You can be the answer to Jesus' prayer here in this passage. You know, it's interesting, after Jesus tells his disciples to pray for workers in Matthew 9, the very next verse in Matthew 10 shows Jesus sending his disciples out into the field 2 by 2. And I'm sure that they didn't feel qualified. I'm sure they were a little bit confused about what to do, and you might feel the same way. I hope watching this video convinces you that you should become a disciple maker if you want to become a full circle follower of Jesus. And in the next lesson, we're going to talk about how you can do that using the tools at PursueGOD.org.